debate tonight. Solidarity in Europe. Is solidarity in Europe fading? So let me now quickly introduce our panel. I'm going to introduce the speakers in the order that they will be speaking. I'll start off with Bruno Waterfield. Bruno is Brussels correspondent for The Times. My second speaker tonight will be Dr. Veronika Priesmeyer-Tkocz. She's Program Director at the European Academy, Berlin. The third speaker tonight is Professor Georgios Varoufakis. Not Varoufakis, Varoufakis. We're very, very pleased to have him here. He's come over from London. He was born and grew up in Crete. He's Professor of the History of Political Thought in the School of History at Queen Mary University of London. Next speaker will be Christian Moos. Christian is the General Secretary of the German section of European Federalists. Last but certainly not least is Dr. Funda Tekin. Dr. Tekin has been senior researcher at the Institute für Europäische Politik, IEP, in Berlin since February 2013.
And I want to argue that solidarity is fading in Europe, and I want to argue that the European Union is largely to blame for that. I think anyone who believes that the EU is about solidarity must have been asleep for years, they must be deluded, or else they're dishonest. Solidarity in the EU dictionary or political lexicon is nothing more than jargon. It's a word that means slavish obedience to rules and institutions. I haven't seen much solidarity, as I define it, in Europe's migration crisis. Instead, in dealing with the challenge, which I think is a positive one, posed by a wave of people seeking a better life in Europe, the EU, the practices, the statecraft and institutions of Europe's states has become obsessed with divisive rules, migrant quotas, I'm sure you're all aware of that debate, being one of them. So the focus has been on bureaucratic quotas and fortress Europe. There'll be more barbed wire, more truncheons to enforce fingerprinting in Italy and Greece, and on their way, new EU so-called hotspot detention centres, although they're called reception centres in Italy and Greece too.
Yes, we do have a crisis of solidarity in Europe, but on the other side, it's not only the crisis of solidarity, it's in general the crisis of trust towards European integration. And so this is not only a question of, do we feel attached to each other, because solidarity it is. It's all about ties in society, as you said, Bruno, of interests or objectives or standards, sympathies and shared values, solidarity. This is something like, the three musketeers saying all for one and one for all. I think this is the best definition of solidarity you can have. But now what we have in Europe, it is more. We have the crisis of trust.
My proposal, which is based on my analysis of the attitude to these things of somebody I have studied in the past, John Stuart Mill, the British philosopher, I call it cosmopolitan patriotism. And the simple idea is people will go on identify with smaller groups than humanity. It's called l'égoïsme à deux, à trois, à quatre. It's a psychological disposition that you cannot identify with the whole of humanity. You identify with some subgroup as opposed to others. Okay, if most of us will go on being like that, although some of us might have loftier natures, what can you do then? Well, you can try to promote a kind of patriotism that feeds on cosmopolitan commitments. So you can try to say that the patriotic thing to do is for our country to do good things for the world.
The question whether Europe's solidarity is fading, to my mind, is rather rhetorical. I clearly think it is fading, and I could now put forward that Europe has always grown in crisis. I could say that the Eurozone reached a new agreement with Greece and that it is working, but I don't intend to do this because I don't want to close my eyes to reality, and I do not believe that this will help our cause, the federalist cause that is. Having said that, it is my firm belief that should their union fail, the Europeans do not stand a chance of surviving the next decades in freedom.
Regarding the solidarity, I really kind of can take up what Christian has just said, because I was also kind of, looking at the title, Is Solidarity in the EU Fading? I would say it's definitely challenged. I'm not so sure whether I would go to the point to say that it's actually fading, because what I do see is the EU is in crisis. I think there we all agree, and it has gone through different crises in the recent past. But I think once the dust has settled, and we kind of view the situation more pragmatically, and I think I really maybe also would like to kind of introduce a more positive note into this debate, because I just looked at the Eurobarometer data just in order to see, because you also said we have a crisis of trust, and I was rather surprised to see that overall trust in the EU is actually has been rising again after throughout the past years.
Does anybody have anything to ask our panel?
I had a question for Bruno Waterfield. My question was, you spoke at the end that you consider the European Union as a barrier to solidarity. I don't really understand what you mean if you go then, because if it's a barrier, if we take it away, there will be more solidarity. So you say that if there's no European Union, there will be more solidarity towards the people in Greece, towards the refugees, towards... That was my... all the points, okay. I want to know more about it.
It has been put forth, solidarity needs action. So it is not enough to just feel compassion or solidarity, but to actually do something. And currently we are in a situation where we need to show a lot of solidarity. So I think solidarity is increasing because we have a chance to show it.
Right, okay.
But if you are talking about refugees and German citizens helping refugees everywhere on the border, do we talk about solidarity or charity? Because this was also a question that we asked today in the podium.
Mate, I would want to make a distinction between the very true and real, spontaneous solidarity of many people in German society and this system of rules and institutions that, one, does not work in a changing world, and to uphold those rules would involve levels of coercion that I would say violate, certainly my sense, of humanity. And I think that's a great distinction and a great question that Europeans have to ask themselves. Do we want to live in a world where we follow the rules whatever happens? Or do we want to live in a world where we have the ability to freely associate and to change those rules and have institutions that represent those rules and associations rather than institutions that tell us what the rules are and expect us to obey?
Obviously, Germany cannot receive 1 million refugees every year, which seems to be, at least for some years, to happen unless we find solidarity again. And solidarity doesn't mean with the refugees, because the refugees, people who are fleeing from war, torture and other, they have a legal right to be received in our countries. Right, but they do not have the right to choose the country. The solidarity that applies is not towards the refugees, because they have a right. They don't need solidarity. They have a legal right. Well, the solidarity is between European countries.
Now, there are things that a nation cannot do, and therefore we need another level of fellow feeling, of cooperation, and up to a point solidarity. There are many different kinds and levels of solidarity, and in our case that is Europe. So we should do an awful lot of things together. But the idea that we should therefore abolish nations and national democracies and states, national states, and build a European state is not only a chimera, it's extremely dangerous. It would destroy the peace that the European Union, European community has indeed achieved for us.
Coming back to Poland, all those protests against refugees are not really, I would at least see it like this, they are not really actually against refugees, they are just protests against the policy of the government. They are not really fond of, because although there is, let's say, an economic success of Poland, there are quite a lot of losers of Polish transformation and quite big groups of the society who has been forgotten in the transformation, and those voices haven't been heard. And those people are coming now getting on the barricades and saying, we are against anything, anybody. We are against regulations from the European Union because we are maybe not so happy of it. We are against Germany and of course against Angela Merkel and her policy of open door because we have certain fears, and nobody has talked about those fears and about those prejudices also for years because they haven't been really accepted. So again, we have problems within the European countries. This is maybe not the crisis of the European Union. These are different crises within the European states. So it's not really time to talk about solidarity, but it's really more like saying, okay, let's just put it aside, take a break, hold a deep breath, and continue talking.
Okay.
We already talked about campaigning, so let's spread the European feeling, I would say. And I think that sounds a little bit like a lot of ads, and I will see it on the streets, go Europe, go there, let's just to be a bit, you know. And my question is, isn't this very much too late?
We have a huge amount of issues, really. We have low voting participation. That's also another thing. I mean, you mentioned, is it perhaps too late? You know, I could say, well, maybe the EU is actually, as Bruno says, or, you know, maybe the cause of the problem, that people understood each other better a couple of years ago when they kind of campaigned to have the borders brought down and were enthusiastic about Schengen, and now they're not, they're no longer. So that would also be a question. Why do we have only 50% of the people participating in voting in many countries? Greece would be a case in point. I mean, people in Greece went out in January, they voted again, then in June, and now we have very low voting participation.
Well, they know they will have elections every 6 months.
They know whoever they vote for, China is back.
And whatever happens, nothing changes.
Yes.
So
and this is maybe something which brings us together in a way, because in Germany we don't vote every 6 months, but we still have a very low lowering voting participation. So again, here too, a question. Well, you know, maybe there's something wrong.
The problem is the euro. The euro was a decision made by a German chancellor who wanted to remain in history as the creator of Europe, perhaps, and the French president with even more ambitions, who was notoriously illiterate in economics. The euro is a catastrophic decision. How can we go back from where we are? I don't know. I'm equally illiterate in economics. What worries me is that we may lose what we had, which is far from perfect, but which had great benefits for all concerned. There is great mutual and benefit in keeping the European Union.
My point is order. What about the order that we have set up with all its difficulties and challenges? Yes, and because of the history, because of all that, what we have achieved is cooperation through institutions and dispute moderated through institutions. Because we've always had dispute. I'm not talking about the Second World War only. That's because some people might think that's what the Germans are always about, etc. No, you can go past beyond that, you know, far time back, and there's always been discord. There's always been powers dominating others. And what we have now is a system of checks and balances, a painful process of finding compromises, and we've got huge challenges that arise from all kinds of sources.
My alternative really is to pull back from the idea that it's institutions that save us from ourselves, and to go back to the traditional, to try and revive the tradition, which I think is alive and well in countries like Germany, as we've seen over recent months, of self-determining democratic societies that are our best future for solidarity and our best safeguard, certainly against war.
Right, okay. Thank you very much. Let's have a clap to our panel, for our panel. I think we've